Uh, so let me know if you can see the screen where I am showing the notepad with the agenda for today.
Yes.
Okay. So yesterday we have seen the introduction part where we talked about the data warehouse, concepts of OLAP, OLTP. Then we moved into the dimensional modeling where we saw the star schema and snowflake schema and did few examples. I started with the Power Center introduction yesterday but couldn't
Hello?
complete. Yes, is there any question? Okay. So we started with the Power Center components but could not complete. So today we will focus majorly on the Power Center components and the architecture of Informatica Power Center. Uh, so basically Power Center is one of the product by Informatica Incorporation, and this product provides you an environment which allows you to load the data from centralized location. So basically if I want to capture the notes, something like this, let me put it in a document. So basically when I talk about Power Center, so it's nothing but it provides. Hello, is everybody able to hear me? I see that Khalid, you are not able to hear me.
I can hear you.
I
I
think
can hear you,
the
sir.
voice broke for a couple of seconds.
So is that you, Khalid? You can hear me right now?
Right now we can hear you, but sometimes we just get like 2 second breaks or something.
Okay. Okay, so basically I was talking about the Power Center introduction. So it is a product of Informatica. It provides an environment to to load data from different kind of sources of sources um, and load the data back to a centralized location to load the data and um, rather I will say to extract data from different kind of sources and load into a centralized location. Uh, so that centralized location can either be a data warehouse or any other database as well. So any operational data source basically should be a centralized repository, and we extract this data from multiple sources. Again, means sources can also be different. We apply this facilitates multiple ways of transforming the data according to the business logic of your system. So this is quite self-explanatory what we have learned about the introduction of ETL. So if you talk about an ETL, it is nothing but extract, transform and load. So Informatica's explanation also falls in the same place. So it extracts data from different kind of sources and load it into a centralized location, and it facilitates multiple ways of transforming the data according to the business logic of your system. So when I talk about Power Center, it provides the ability to view and analyze the business logic. So that is an added advantage. So it provides ability to view and analyze business information. So when I say business information, anything which is related to your business, either it could be your business entity or the business process. Means when I say business entity, let's say I take an example of an e-commerce company. So business is nothing but let's say Amazon. So Amazon's business is selling of products, and products varies with different ranges different types, everything. So all these things are the actual product, and they are just the mediator who takes it from the sellers and passes it to the actual consumers. So they all fall under a business need. So that's why we are saying analyze the business information. In this case, the entity could be the actual object which I can purchase from Amazon site and browse the business and browse and analyze the metadata within the metadata repositories. So that is why we say that we can view and analyze the business information along with the business processes. So this is also a capability within Power Center where you can actually visualize the business entities and the business processes and analyze it at different stages. So that's the added advantage. If you want to see any other ETL tool which is commercially available, or many companies who write the ETL job as their own job which are custom made. So in those cases, to have the ability to view and analyze the business information, it becomes a different kind of challenge, because it either you will not have the UI to see, or you will not have the or you will not have actually uh, the way to analyze the business processes in a correct GUI format. So those will be the challenges, but in case of Informatica Power Center, you will not have to face that problems. Informatica Power Center includes many components. So as I have mentioned in my agenda item, you can see, so we will talk about these individually. About these are the major components when I talk about Informatica domain, Power Center repository, Informatica administrator, domain configuration, Power Center client, Power Center repository service, integration service, web service hub, SAP BW service, reporting service, and metadata manager service. So these are the basic Power Center components which get installed on a machine whenever you install a Power Center, Informatica Power Center on a server. Now we will talk each one by one, but before I start talking, let me just give you a brief on these components, how they are laid in the system, maybe a pictorial representation which will help you to start understanding these components in a better way. So let me open an Excel sheet first. And let me copy these items so that you can correlate what I am talking. So these are the major components. Now if I try to depict it in a picture, it will somewhere look something like this. Maybe I will say that this. So basically the core heart of Informatica is basically a domain. So whenever we will start talking about the administration part, any Informatica setup will have at least one domain to start your work, and each domain can have multiple nodes, one or more nodes. So I will let's say create this, maybe nodes I will create for now. So let's say I have node 1 and node 2. Now why I need multiple nodes within a domain? We will talk about this in detail, but for now, to understand these components, just understand that one domain can have multiple nodes, and nodes will internally have uh, first the service manager, and service manager is nothing but manager for all services. So if you see here, there are multiple services which I have listed. For example, repository service, integration service, web service hub. So these are nothing but the different kind of services which Informatica supports. So I am writing this service manager, let's say in bold, and this service manager will internally have this repository service, then it will have this integration service, it will have this web service hub. We'll talk each where these services are used, but this is the place where all these services will reside. So web service hub, SAP BW service, then the reporting service and the metadata manager service. So these services will fall under the service manager within a node of a domain. So if I create a new domain or a new node, then again I will have this service manager available for this node as well, with all these basic services available for this node as well. Now this domain, node and service manager having these services we have seen. Now at the same time you will have something called a source, which we know that this Informatica is actually meant for. So I will create, let's say, a source block here, and I will also create another here as the target. So when I talk about any source, source can also vary. Means ideally it could be a relational database, or it could be a flat file, or it could itself be a web service. When I talk about web service, you can now imagine the example which I was trying to give you about Amazon, which is an e-commerce website. So Amazon has multiple data points. So let me take another example of Facebook. So even Facebook has multiple data points. So if you go and press a like button, or if you give some comment with some textual value, or you have any friends of you or friends of friends. So all these things are nothing but the data points which are available as form of flat file or any other data which are stored in some NoSQL kind of database in Facebook repository. They communicate all these information via web services. Either it could be a RESTful web service or based on SOAP protocol. And if they start passing these values, so that means they are having some web service, and web service could be the input for ETL to fetch the data as a source, and we will have the transformation and the load process based on that web service. So that could be another kind of source. It could be an application as well. When I say application, I'm referring to all kind of application. It could be a desktop application, it could be a mobile Android or iOS application. So they all have their own data points from which we can fetch, and I'm basically talking about the custom application. It can fetch data from mainframe systems. Yes, go ahead if anybody has a question. Okay, so it could fetch the data from mainframe or any other system. I would keep it open because Informatica has a very great architecture to plug its components with any custom application or any other kind of database or any file system from which it can fetch the data for its processing. And I would keep the same kind of data points as the targets, because because Informatica doesn't stop you for having any other kind of target sources as well. So target can also be a relational, flat file, web service, application, mainframe, or any other source as well. In this entire picture, there is this domain which is the heart of Informatica, and to manage this domain there is something called, maybe I will write it as, let me give it some color. So they call it as domain configuration. So this domain configuration helps you to configure the domain. Means when I say configuring domain, you can have n number of nodes. By default, one node is always there. You can manage the licenses, you can manage these service managers, which service manager you want to enable for your setup. All these things will be taken care by this domain configuration. Then comes the repository part, because when I talk about Informatica also have its own repository. So the basic repository which they have is, let me draw it with some other color. So they call it as Powercenter repository. So Powercenter repository are nothing but the actual placeholder, because when we start working on Powercenter, you will start creating some entities, and those entities are nothing but the metadata which you are going to represent, because source there will be some metadata and you will link it with some of the actual database or a flat file or a word file or anything which you want from where you want to fetch the data. So those metadata information need to be stored at some point or some place. So that's why Informatica itself gives you a repository kind of thing, which is nothing but a relation database, and it stores all these entities within that repository, and helps you to build the entire business within that. So this Power Center repository is one of the prime thing. Apart from this Power Center repository, there are two other repositories as well, which you install if you need that. So one, they call it as data analyzer repository, and other one is metadata manager repository. So these are also relational databases to store few of the extra components within the Informatica system. So now when and there is another thing which is the hard, means which is the day-to-day work on which you will do, and that is the client component. So we call it as Power Center client, and this majorly are divided into three parts, that is four part, that is designer, workflow manager, workflow monitor, and the repository manager. So now if you see what I have written in this Informatica components, all these things are fit here. So Informatica domain is nothing but this entire box, which they majorly prefer it as the server component of Informatica. Informatica repository. So Informatica repository is nothing but this repository which I have mentioned. Then Informatica administrator. So again, apart from this target, there is another component which Informatica supports. So that this is nothing but the administrator. So this helps you to manage this helps you to manage what kind of licenses, what kind of security, and what kind of domain configuration you want to give. So that is why this component is also there. Domain configuration, again what I spoke some time back, it is to enable what kind of services within your node and how many nodes you want in your domain. So that kind of configuration is being given by domain configuration. Now you might have the question that why this multiple nodes or one or many node support is there for within a domain. So that is to ensure that there is no failback, and you can manage your system in a right fashion, because in any organization you do not work with one server. So there should be a fail-safe mechanism, or there should be a case where you can balance the load, because load balancing is also an important aspect. So if I have, let's say, only one node within my domain, and let's say that node stops because of some reason, either it crashes or because of some any reason, this node uh, is now shut down. So in this case, what will happen is the entire Informatica system will go down and you will not be able to do any ETL job from that domain, because all your services are now stopped. So to address this, they keep a backup kind of node. So that is one reason to have this multiple node system. And another reason is to balance the load, because it has its own limitation. Even if it is a machine, and if I say it's a let's say 5 core or 25 core or 50 core machine, and it has its own limitation. So when in actual practice a company runs, it has multiple requests coming at in a fraction of second, and maybe a single node is not capable enough to handle all these load. So that's the reason we go ahead and configure multiple nodes, and these nodes helps us to balance the load uh, and cater the services so that it doesn't hamper your performance. So that's the reason we support one or multiple nodes within a domain. Then comes
All right,
this.
I have
Yes, go ahead.
not a question, but just a statement. So I believe the node configuration system is this, lead us to some best practices and standards and procedures and guidelines. So I hope that you're gonna tell us that once that the point comes, like why there are multiple nodes and why there is a phenomena of like declaring multiple nodes and do the domain configuration.
Yes, so when I will start the topic for administration of Informatica Powercenter, I will talk in detail on that. Right now, I'm just giving a brief of these components, Power Center components. So I'm just helping your
Fair enough.
thought
Fair
process to
enough.
build.
That was my understanding. So I just want to give a heads up.
Yes, perfect.
All right.
Then this is again a Power Center client, which you will deal maximum time of yours with these clients. So client have designer, workflow manager, workflow monitor, and repository manager. So I think yesterday when we opened the client, we saw these four components, and these are the major components which you will work with in your day-to-day life. Then comes this Power Center repository service, integration service, web service hub, which are nothing but these components of your service manager. So repository service are those services which helps you to communicate with this Power Center repository, because though this is a relational database, but as a company standpoint or as a product standpoint, this relational database is not open for your own consumption. So if this relational database is open to you, you could have gone in and maybe you can execute some SQL queries which could corrupt this database. So as a company standpoint, they always prefer to communicate with this repository using this repository services. Then when I talk about integration service, these are majorly the services which you want to use for loading a source from multiple different kind of sources and load the data back to a target, which is again a multiple different kind of targets. So for that we use the integration service. Again, there is a web service hub. This web service hub is majorly the gateway that exposes the Power Center functionality to any external client through web services. So so this is one typical example when we say that I want to integrate with any of the custom client which have their own database and they don't want to expose that database to us for Informatica's consumption, or there could be some other way of data source which the source owner are not going to expose with us. At that point we expose this web service hub and we ask, if you want to load the data within the Informatica system, please use this web service hub, which gives you a huge set of uh, web services which they can call and upload the data within the Informatica system. This SAP
So,
BW,
one question. The web services supports all kind of web services, like RESTful web services as well, right? These services.
yes, yes. So
Okay.
RESTful, as well as even this supports SOAP as a protocol as well.
Thank you.
Talking about SAP BW service, this service actually extracts the data and loads the data to majorly SAP NetWeaver Business Intelligence. If you use, means again, they gives the Power Exchange for SAP NetWeaver BI. So Power Exchange are nothing but the pluggable components with with any kind of different sources. So Power Exchange for SAP NetWeaver BI is a different protocol. So to use that, you will need this SAP BW service. Uh, then coming to the reporting service, this reporting service runs the data analyzer web application. So there is a different kind of web application for data analyzer which provides you a framework for creating and running your custom reports. So you may say that, oh, I don't have fund for purchasing any downstream reporting application, say Cognos or Tableau or any other thing. So you can still go ahead, and reporting service will help you to build those kind of reports. So Informatica itself has a framework for creating and running these custom reports and dashboard based on the data which you have loaded. So reporting service helps to build that kind of report. Then coming to metadata manager service, this runs the metadata manager web application. So basically metadata manager is to browse and analyze the metadata which is sitting in this Powercenter repository, and this helps you to understand and manage the actual information and processes which are derived, how they are related, and how they are used. So that is where this metadata manager service comes in picture. So these all services which falls under this service manager, these are helping to work with the Informatica. So in this entire picture what I have showing here, apart from these two ping boxes which is not a part of Informatica, all the other components are the Informatica parts. So that's why if you see in this list, I have mentioned everything which falls in this picture except this source and this target. So so far so good. If you have any question, please stop me. Okay, so next what I wanted to talk about means I will now slowly jump towards the architecture of this and how these component falls in the architecture of Informatica. So just give me a minute.
And just quick question.
Mhm.
What does administrator do?
Administrators majorly are managing these domains. So basically when I talk about this domain having the nodes and also that domain page, so let me first give you a brief of that. Maybe you can picturize it. I will talk about the administrator in the specific class for administrator. So let me go to this Informatica setup. So if you see, we spoke about this Informatica client, Powercenter client. We spoke about these 4 clients: Powercenter Designer, repository manager, workflow manager, and workflow monitor. Apart from that, if you go in this server, you will find this Informatica administrator homepage. So if I click this, so this is there any question, Ames?
No, you can continue. Sorry about that.
Okay, so basically, whenever you install this Informatica Powercenter, this web client gets installed along with it, and this web means basically Informatica administrator is nothing but this web application that you use to administer the domains which I spoke, and majorly managing the security point of view and the licensing and all. So if you see, the login credential is administrator A capital, and password is same. So I'm just giving you a look and feel of how the administrator look like. So if you see here, you can see these domains, logs, monitoring, report, and security. So these are the action you can do within an administrator. When I say, so here if you see this, Ravan is nothing but a domain which is having, if you see here, the number of nodes in this is 1, and it is having 2 processes within it. So these 2 processes are nothing but what I was trying to show you within that service manager, what kind of processes you can enable. So this is that. You can have these actions, for example, adding a new folder or node or grid, or these are the services which we spoke just now. So these are the things which you can manage along with the licensing ability. And the major part is the security. So security is also a part which you can manage via the administrator. We will talk about this when we come on this particular topic. And this, so apart from these 2 major topics, that is managing a domain and managing a security, you can also see the logs, basically view the logs for a domain. So anything which is happening within this domain, that means it can happen in multiple nodes, multiple processes, anything. So those things you can see using this view logs for domain. So it will redirect you to this logs page. I have clicked it. So it brought me to this logs tab, which is again segregated into multiple points, that is domain, service, and user activity. So whatever action I can see within this domain, so these are the logs, these are for services, and these are for the user activity. So for now on this setup we have not done any user activity, so that's the reason you can see this is empty. So does this helps you to get the picture clear what we can do as an administrator?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so again I will move back. uh, so basically this administrator helps you to manage the domain and the security aspect. Now let me jump into the administration part. Just let me take a water. Okay, so when we talk about Informatica architecture, it is majorly uh, having the 2 major components within Informatica architecture. So let's say I say that this is my Informatica. So let me Informatica. So Informatica architecture, when I talk here, it has majorly one architecture which we support is the client server architecture. So this is a client server. So we support a client server kind of architecture where we have a server component which is the backend processes, I would say, and the other is the client, which is nothing but the GUI component which we spoke, GUI based applications, I will say. So this client server architecture, if I again go back to the diagram which we saw here, the client only applies to this box, whereas the server applies to this, 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 and if you have configured your system for data analyzer as well as metadata repository and administrator. So all these things, whatever I have drawn in this diagram, apart from these two ping boxes, falls under this server, which is the backend processes, and the client is only this specific box, which is the client component. So this is one architecture we support. So that is what I'm referring, because this is one of the architecture we support for Informatica architecture, and the other architecture which we support is the service oriented architecture. So any communication happens within Informatica, so that is based on the service oriented architecture. So I believe you are familiar with the service-oriented architecture. In short, in one sentence, service-oriented architecture is nothing but a architecture which is based on small loose-grained services which the product can use at any point of time. So that's why they call it as a service oriented architecture. So these are the two different way of seeing the Informatica architecture. Now we'll talk about how the communication happens between all these components using this services. So this will clear majority of our thought process, because uh, this is one of the important thing which you should learn, and whatever I am trying to picturize, this will always remain with you whenever you talk about the Informatica use cases or the workflows. So let me take a new sheet so that it will help us to go back and forth. So let me pull this into the architecture diagram. Now on this third sheet, what I'm trying to draw is so this is nothing but a domain. So for simplistic case, what I'm going to take here is I'm going to consider this as one domain having one node only. So this is my domain, and I'm not writing the node because I'm considering there is only one node. Inside this, the important components which we will majorly deal is the integration service. So let me draw it with some different color. So let me name it as integration service. Uh, there will be something called repository service. So repository service is one thing and repository service processes is another thing. Now I will draw a small line here. So this is let's say my domain and it have a repository here. So this is my repository, that is the Powercenter repository. So let's say this is my domain having one node and all these things which we spoke earlier, integration service. The reason, if you go back, I am only keeping this repository service and integration service component of service manager. All other things are majorly to deal with a different kind of source. So that's the reason I am not mentioning that here. So going back here, I'm only keeping this integration service and repository service, and I have drawn this repository in the below one. Now let me say that I have a source here which could be anything, which is majorly the component which can come from various sources. So those sources are not actually a part of in Informatica, and there will be some component for target as well. Targets can also be anything other which is not falling within Powercenter architecture. We have a client component, maybe I will draw it here, let's say blue color, and let's say these are the clients. So let me say that there is a designer, workflow manager, workflow monitor, and repository manager. So let's say that. So these are my different clients, and apart from that, I will have a administration console and the domain configuration, as I have drawn in this picture, administration and domain configuration. I will say here, let's say this is my, so this is nothing but that same web client which I shown you some time back, and there is something called a domain configuration. So all these blue boxes which I have drawn, as I spoke earlier, these all are Informatica components, where this is the client and these are the server components and these are the sources. Now how this service oriented architecture come in picture, because in this diagram I have shown you the server and the client. So in this diagram, this is the client and these are the server. Now how the communication happens, that is majorly these clients connects with these sources because they have to fetch the data from those sources. So there has to be a connection between that. So maybe I will draw it via this. So this connection is nothing but the generic ODBC connection. At the same place, this client need to have a connection between the targets as well, because it need that connection to load the data. So maybe I will insert another. So this also happens via the ODBC connection. So now if you can see, based on this connection from the client, from the source within the client, I have done a ODBC connection. That means whatever be the source of my data, I can pull that data from that specific source to this client. uh, so for this we generally use this designer as the client, and we pull all the information of the source using this connection to the designer. Feel free to stop me if you have any question, because this should clear the big picture of Informatica. So once this connection is done, what we are going to do is, using that data, we will have to call the repository service. So for that repository service, we make this, means for any client, from any client, we generally use this repository service, and to make this call we generally use the TCP IP connection. So this TCP IP connection is from any client which makes the call to repository service. Now you can think that once I have the source available, I have this connection, ODBC connection, and get the data on this client. That means I need to create that metadata into this repository. So if I have to create that metadata information within that repository, I have to use this repository service using this TCP IP protocol. I make the call to this server as this repository service. This repository service communicates with this repository using this repository service process, which is running whenever your Informatica process is running. So this process is always running. So this will communicate, this repository service will communicate with this repository using this process called repository service process, and the data will get created within your repository of Informatica Powercenter. Now once you have this data available, what you have to do is you have to also load the same data, because when I'm saying that there is a ODBC connection between the source and the client, this will only allow the client to access the objects from the source, but am I actually extracting the objects from that source? So this will not allow that. For that, what we will have to do is we will have to use this integration service, and this integration service helps uh, Informatica to actually fetch the objects and put it within the repository. So again, integration service to put the data within that repository has internally have to talk to this repository service. So this will make this repository service call. Now how this sources, which can be any source, is actually fetched within the Informatica server. So this connection is basically by the native drivers. Native drivers, when I say native drivers, can be any driver based on the type of source. And if I am working with only a database, which is a RDBMS database, I can have a ODBC connection over here. So native driver or ODBC are the type of connection between the source to the integration service, and once my integration service have the data fetched from various sources, we make the use of again TCP/IP protocol to communicate this integration service with the repository service and push the data to the repository. Uh, so far so good. If you have any question, please stop me.
What does the client do? The designer I'm talking about.
Okay.
With the source.
So basically, this designer, anyway, you have to fetch or make the connection to the source, because when I say this source is a, let's say SAP, some database, SAP's database, or let's say a Salesforce database. So this is not in your control. Means when I say your control, you are a Informatica Powercenter developer or architecture. You do not have the control of this particular source. So how you will fetch the data? You in this integration service, it is not a pull-based mechanism. So you will have to use this client to make this communication between this source. So that is this ODBC connection, so which designer will have. So in this designer, when you will work actually how to fetch the data from the source, you will correlate it. But for now, just understand that you are having this UI just to make sure that the source is known to you and you have a mechanism to pull the data from that source. So that is based on this ODBC connection from this designer. You establish that kind of connection. Once you have that connection, that means you have the metadata information from this designer pushed to the repository, but you have still not filled the data. You have just created a container for that source, and that container is yet to be filled with the actual data. So to fill that actual data, this sources which are now part of your metadata, because here though I am showing this arrow from this sources, they are actually getting worked from your client. Means this arrow, when I'm saying native driver oblique ODBC from this source to the integration service, this is the actual source, but this meta information is residing in this client, and that client helps you to push the integration service uh, to pull the actual data, fill the container and push it to the repository. Does that helps, or you have still any question in, means I know there will be some question in your mind, but can you able to picturize it in a vague way?
Yeah, I think I got it. I just like the designer makes connection with the sources and at the same time integration that then goes then the next process the targets.
Exactly. So basically client helps you to define that path of pushing that integration service and pulling the actual data, extracting the actual data from the source. So that is why the client is always required. Uh, so maybe another example, maybe a very in a layman language, if you are familiar with data patterns and all. So in design pattern, there is a pattern called means there is adapter pattern, listener pattern, which actually falls which works based on any whenever I create a source, I will simply go ahead and make a call. Either I can attach my adapter there, or I can have a component which will listen to that source. So for that, what I will have to do is I will have to implement something on that source which will invoke an event which, so that I can listen that. So in this case, since this source is out of my territory and I cannot write any event invocation method or anything like that, so that's the reason we have to go with the observer kind of pattern. So in observer pattern, uh, we generally try to pull the data, and based on that we fire the events to the next action. So here you can say that this client is nothing but the observer class, which is observing the sources and pushing the data to the integration services. So that could be another analogy which I can give you.
Thanks. Perfect.
Okay, so moving to the next part again, now we have the sources available within Informatica, and it is also available in the Powercenter repository. Now there will be these two communication, which is a primary communication. I will just means administration communication. This happens for the domain. So this is nothing but the HTTP calls, and means anything which is coming from that administration web console. uh, for the domain configuration, it is all based on HTTP. So this is apart from the workflow which we were talking. I'm just creating that link because you will understand this. And again, at the same time, domain configuration, this is also based on the native drivers. So because you know what the domain you have, so this domain configuration, whenever talks with this domain, they talk in terms of the native driver. So this is just for communication sake I have drawn this. Now once you have the repository filled with the source data, you move your connection to workflow manager. A workflow manager is the place from where you actually define your business process. So you define your business process, apply different kind of transformations, and you want to communicate. So for this workflow manager and workflow monitor, so these are the two in UI components which talks directly with the integration service. So uh, maybe I will draw with this separate box. So this two clients which are majorly handling your entire business process. So workflow manager is to creating your business process and the transformation, and workflow monitor is to actually monitor your business process, how it is flowing. So these two application talks with the integration service, again using the TCP IP protocol. When I say these two specific clients are talking to integration service, that means what? That from a use case point of view, you have the sources identified on the designer, you pull the data into this repository. Now you have the references of all the source data within your Informatica. Now you apply this workflow manager to define your business process. When you are defining that business process, you are referring to the actual source metadata information which is residing in this repository. You are making a TCP IP call to the integration service, pulling the metadata information of the source again from the Informatica repository, performing the actions based on the business process, which are nothing but the integration service. And once the integration service is done, you again push back the data within the repository for target metadata. So now it comes as the target. So let me draw this picture. So basically this target definition, also we use designer client. So designer client, you make a connection to the target, which I have shown in this arrow using a ODBC client. So you know that this is the container which you need to fill. So since the target is known to you, you have the repository, you have the meta information within the Informatica repository for target. Once workflow manager execution is complete, you fill that container for the target, and now your meta information of target is populated. Now you want to actually push the data to the actual target. So for that, maybe what here, this will not be a two-dimensional arrow, this will be a single dimensional arrow, because here we are just pushing the data to the target. So that's why I used a single directional arrow. And this connection is again going to be a native driver oblique ODBC, because target can be anything which is not in Informatica's control. So that is why this connection is also native driver. Now when your repository have the meta information of the target filled, this integration service will take the data from this repository using this repository service and push the data to the target. So this is the actual entire architecture of Informatica and how the communication happens. So now you can correlate. If I go back to this diagram where I was talking about two type of architecture which we use in Informatica, that is server client architecture. This you can correlate using these two picture, that we have a client and we have a server component. And we also have a service oriented architecture. We generally call it as SOA architecture. And SOA architecture, you can clearly understand why we are talking it, because we have all these communications via some or the other protocol. Either it could be a TCP IP protocol or a ODBC protocol or a native driver or HTTP protocol. So that is why we call it as a service oriented architecture. And if you again correlate with the all components of Informatica, we have covered all these components here. Only thing is these extra services which falls under service manager, we have not shown it in this diagram. The reason is it will become complicated, but it will sit somewhere in this domain. And internally also these integration service, because if I say that your source is a SAP BI, then you will have this SAP BW service which will be placed somewhere here, and integration service will talk to that SAP BW service using the TCP IP protocol. So that is how you can picturize this architecture.
Ayan, I have one question.
Sure, go ahead.
You go back to the services slide.
Okay.
Yeah. So we listed here multiple services, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the core service is basically the integration services that manage all the services. Even though for the sake of complexity, you didn't mention in the third sheet, but the core services are going to be the integration services.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Oh, cool.
Integration service and repository service are also core services. So I would state repository service and integration service both are core.
Okay, I see.
The reason of having repository service is core because unless and until you have this repository service, you will not able to fetch the source data.
Right. I got it. I got it.
Great.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Any questions so far by any other participant? Great. So basically I will stop today here only because I want you to understand this more closely. I will pass on some more material around this along with these notes to you. Maybe you can spend some time today, and tomorrow's class will be majorly on the application where we will start understanding the sources using a designer client. That time you will be able to correlate what connection I am making from the source, how the integration service, though you will not actually see the integration service coming in picture because it's all wrapped under the server component, but at least you will start realizing that how the data flow is happening, because we will start introducing the sources within the designer tomorrow. Uh, any question or yeah, go ahead.
Just finishing it so I can have another question. So in the integrations, all the whatever the or whatever it is, pass the data to targets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure. Because you said the repository usually the information like the data points or something like that stores there, so I got a little confused.
No, I didn't get the confusion of yours. Can you come again?
Okay, so the repository, right, in the domain, does it store the actual source data and then load it to the targets, or it just stores the high level information about the source data and then loads the data directly to target?
You are talking about this repository, right?
Yes, yes.
So you can consider this as a database only. So basically this is a database of Informatica. So first you create some containers, maybe some classes you create when you source source data. Once the source data or the container or the basic class is created within this repository, you actually perform the extraction logic. So at that time extraction will happen using this native driver or ODBC connection. Using this integration service, this service will be responsible to populate that class which you have created in this database. That means the entire data of source is available to you in your own format, means the way you want to design. It can be different than the actual source as well. So once you have that complete data, you make a transformation again using the integration service. So it's something like that, means maybe if I can show you, this is a container. Let me say this is your source container and this is your target container. So so let's go with the use case again. So you make a ODBC connection from your designer and you use some or the source. So at that point you created this empty container for source. Then you made this connection to the target and created a target object. That means you created this empty container for the target. Then you perform the extraction logic which actually pulled the data from the source. Using the integration service, you populated the repository. That means you are actually filling the data here. So let me say that these are the data which you filled after the extraction from source. So data is there. Now you applied the workflow manager. So workflow manager will have its own way of business processing which you have to design. And I think someone is saying that
Actually, not someone. I think everybody has a voice issue. So I reckon if you can speak slow.
okay. So basically I was talking about that source container getting created when this first connection happens, then the target container created when this connection is happening. Then when I'm extracting the actual data from the source using this integration service, I'm populating this source container. Then based on the workflow manager business case, I read the data from this source, apply some transformation. Maybe I will write it here. Maybe this is your business process. And this business process is created based on your workflow manager. So source, we pull the data, we execute some action, and after that we push the data to the target. That means this empty container is also filled up now. Now this data is still within sorry. So this container is still within the scope of your own Informatica. So it has to get pushed to this target. So for that, the schema of this and the schema of this need to be mapped properly. So that mapping is already done during the time when you created this and when you created your workflow manager. So now it's the responsibility of this native driver or this ODBC connection which takes this data and pushes it to the corresponding targets. So does this answer your question about this repository? Hello?
ये रिकॉर्ड हो रहा है.
Hello?
Yes, Ayan.
I don't know, means where I got dropped off.
I think you are explaining the internal repository resources and target containers. You can start with that.
Okay, so basically I was talking about means let me take that flow again. So how it will happen is when you create this ODBC connection from your designer to the source, you create this empty container, and this empty container is created within this repository. Then when you have a connection from your designer to this target using ODBC, you again create a empty container for target, and then you start using your workflow manager to define this business process, how it will take the data from the source, what transformation it will apply, and how it will put it to the target. So this will be within this workflow manager. Now when you actually extract the data from the source using this native driver, you actually use this integration service to fill this repository. So here you are actually filling this empty class with the rows for the actual object. Once these objects are filled, your business process know what to do with that object. Means till now it was empty, so once the data is filled, you know what has to do with this data. Once the data is processed using this business process, you populate this data in the target table within your Informatica system. Now once this data is available within your Informatica system, it's all about this native driver or ODBC connection which you have already established to push this data to the actual target. So this is how the workflow is. So that is the importance of this repository. So is that answers the question which was asked for this repository?
Yes, that's fantastic. I got it now. Thank you very much.
All right, Ayan, this is Mahmood. I have a few conceptual questions.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the repository basically, while like installing the Informatica and doing the configuration, is it the concept that relates to the staging area, the repository, the concept of staging area? And the second conceptual question is, like we know, like have the incremental load, partial load, or the full load, where that comes from. Is it under the administration, or is it also the configuration? Is it also under the client where we are dealing with the workflow manager and workflow monitor?
Mahmood, I didn't get the second question. I understood your first question. Can you repeat your second question once again?
Second question is, we have a concept during in the ETL. There are two. There is the one fundamental concept which is called the loading mechanism, and there are three different types of mechanisms at high level. One is the full load, incremental load, or partial load.
Correct.
So that configuration comes under the client or the administration, or like I just want to understand.
Okay, so coming back to your first question, you were asking whether this repository is a part of your staging, or means you have a concept of staging and full production deployment kind of thing, and where this repository actually fit. So basically this this repository itself can be divided into two parts. That is, we call it as staging or local repository, and global repository or production repository. So when you install this Informatica, there is only one repository which gets created. Now when you actually perform any development, means Informatica developers, if they are creating the workflow manager and doing a testing, they will create a folder within which they will start working. So again, that will be a part of your repository manager's work, where you are creating the folder and giving the permission. So if you are marking your repository as local or staging, it will create a replica of this repository DB in that same system where you will start working. And when you move this after the development is complete, you will start using that as a production or global repository. So when in this picture, I will not distinguish with two different blocks for repository, I will keep this repository as same, and maybe I will mark something as local or staging and global or production within this same database.
Mm-hmm. That will clear the concept. Okay.
That is the concept. And coming
Mm-hmm.
to your second question, where you are asking about loading the data, because in Informatica, since the data size within the source can be huge, so to help in performance, there are cases to load a partial data or the complete data or a certain percentage of data. So those things are covered within the ETL job itself. It is not an administrator or configurations job. It is actually taken care by the ETL job. When I say ETL job, it should come when we talk about the workflow manager.
I think along with the designer as well.
Along with the designer as well. Yes, perfect.
Okay. Now my concept is. Thank you.
Great. Any other question, or we can wrap up for today?
I think we can wrap it up for today.
Great. So maybe as I did yesterday, I will pass on the notes which we took today along with few material which I have, so that you can do a homework, maybe going through those things. And if you have any question, either feel free to mail me so that I can answer you, or if it is short and quick, we can discuss it tomorrow when we start our class. And
All right.
also I will check the dimensional modeling assignment which you guys have sent to me. I will respond to you maybe whenever I get time today. So great.
That's great.
Great. So thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.